Hi guys, welcome to this week's art history lesson. Today we're going to learn about Edvard Munch, who's a super cool dude. I'd like to apologise for the sound quality throughout this recording, because still they're digging up the road outside my house, so you might hear a drill every now and again, so sorry about that. And without further ado, let's begin. So today's artist Edvard Munch. You probably know this painting here, the Scream. It's one of the most commonly referenced paintings in kind of pop culture. You'll definitely have seen it in The Simpsons, maybe referenced in different kind of cartoon strips. And it's because it is such a dramatic pose, and you can do some quite funny things with it. So who was Edvard Munch? Edvard Munch, here he is, looking very distinguished in the snow. He was born in 1864 and died around 1944, so kind of like he was around during the World Wars. He lived quite a good age till he was 80. He was a Norwegian artist, known for his expressionist and symbolist style, which, don't worry, we'll get into what those words mean later. And quite unusually for an artist, he was very successful in his lifetime. He made lots of money. He was very popular in Europe, particularly Norway. He didn't really make his way to Britain. He wasn't so known here, but in France and Norway and Germany, he was real big. He made lots of money. And he was sold his first painting at 18, so he was on a kind of a good path from the start. Like we said, his most famous work was that one we just saw, The Scream, which is part of a collection of works that he made kind of in the 1890s called The Frieze of Life. So it was kind of all about kind of the different things happening in life. He was quite obsessive is maybe too strong a word, but he definitely returned to the same subjects over and over again. He would kind of redo them, revisit them, try again. It seemed like he couldn't really let them go, and he kind of painted them over and over again until he kind of got them right, or kind of tried different things, or kind of viewed them differently, maybe now he was older. And one of the reasons we have access to so much of his work is because he left his estate to the city of Oslo when he died. So a bit like the Burrell collection in Glasgow. I don't know what Burrell's first name was, but he left all that stuff to the people of Glasgow, and that's why we've got it all. Which I think is quite a good technique if you're an artist and you want to be remembered posthumously, is leave all your stuff to the people, and then they've got to look at it. And luckily for us, Munch did that. He left 1,150 paintings, 17,800 prints, 4,500 watercolors and drawings, and 13 sculptures, which is a whole lot of work. So that's all kind of viewable in Oslo at kind of a different stages. Obviously, some of it is in storage, but it's all there. It's pretty cool. So let's learn a bit about his early life, because his early life definitely had an impact on the art he made. He had quite a tragic early life, to say the least. Here he is as a young man, very nice suit, interesting haircut. And unfortunately for Munch, his mum died when he was 5, which is obviously a very big thing to happen to you. And after that, his dad obviously was really upset and entered a deep grief and depression, and unfortunately turned to alcohol, which made obviously him not the best father at that point. He was also very religious, and kind of the combination of those two things became quite toxic for the family. He once said of his father, "My father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious to the point of psychoneurosis." It's a big word. From him I inherited the seeds of madness. The angels of fear, sorrow and death stood by my side since the day I was born. So Munch definitely puts a lot of store in these things that happened to him. He really feels that they affected him, so much so kind of the seeds kind of implies that it's like within him, and kind of the angels of fear, sorrow and death. It's kind of a weird mix there. Kind of the angels, which are generally seen as something quite positive, mixed with these kind of the more negative sides of life. His father, however, did provide him with a great knowledge and education in history and literature, because as a priest, he was a very learned man, and he kind of passed that on to his son. So it was a kind of a complicated relationship that was obviously affected by this tragedy that happened when he was such a young man. And obviously, mental health support wouldn't have been the same back in the day. So kind of self-medicating with alcohol would have been something that was quite common after such a tragic event. And then also they had another tragic event. His older sister Sophie died of tuberculosis when she was 14. Very sad, which is quite a dramatic disease, illness, which was very sad. And also his younger sister Inger was very unwell, and she seemed to have kind of hallucinations and things in a way that wasn't really well understood, and there wasn't much treatment for, and she was often hospitalized, quite often against her will as well, which would have been, again, a very traumatic event for her, but also for her family. So it's not kind of a carefree childhood that Munch had, to say the least. How did that affect his work? So this is an early self-portrait we've got here. So in 1879, he left school at 16 to study engineering. And then he tried that for a bit, but in 1881, he left that to become a painter and began art school in Oslo. And his dad wasn't into this. His dad thought artists were degenerates and that he was going to die starving alone in a garret, which is kind of what's not unknown to happen to artists. Luckily it didn't happen to Munch, but his dad was concerned about this lifestyle choice and career choice that his son had made at, so probably about, what would have been, 18 by then. So Munch had a mentor when he was at art school, and he painted in a very naturalistic style. So naturalistic is kind of another word for realistic, really. And let's have a look at some of his mentor's work. His mentor was called Crow. I hope I've pronounced that right. So here we go, we've got kind of a woman, she's got a little baby, she's asleep by the baby. So she's kind of rocking the baby to sleep. Now she's fallen asleep herself. And then this is another one. This is kind of a mother plaiting her daughter's hair. So they're painted very realistically. The subject is quite intimate. It's kind of family life. It's little bits of kind of the everyday. So we're not looking at kind of grand subjects. The subjects are very small moments that are happening in everyday people's lives. They don't seem to be rich people. They haven't got like gowns and things on, and they're not necessarily aware that they are the subject of a painting. They're looking away. So it's kind of almost like a kind of candid photography thing, but in the 19th century and with oil paints. So Crow had a big influence on Munch's early work. So let's have a look at some of Munch's early work. So we've got this one here, which is kind of a girl lighting a fire. So again, you can see the style of painting is very similar, very light, some quite muted tones. And again, it's kind of a small moment in the kind of the everyday domesticities of the day. So woman, she's lighting the fire. She's not really aware that we're looking at her. She's just getting on with her day. And it's kind of like we've just snuck in and then just witnessing this small thing that's part of her routine. And this is another one as well. So it's just a woman, she's putting on her socks. She's looking out the window. Again, we've got a very light colour, very airy, small things, very simple. There's nothing too ostentatious. And again, she's not looking at her. So it's very common for people to initially kind of emulate the work of the people that are teaching them before they've able to find kind of what their work is. So this is kind of that stage in Munch's career. And this is what he was doing at that point in time, kind of small depictions of everyday life, of kind of everyday people. And then it changed. So this is quite different. This is from 1885, and this is called The Sick Child, and he painted it when he was 22. So again, we've got, it's inside, it's in somebody's house. We've got, again, two women. They're not looking at us. They don't seem to be aware that we're there. But the way it's painted isn't naturalistic. It's different. He's put a bit of a spin on it. We've got lots of vertical lines. We've got lots of contrasting colours. We've got greens and reds going on. It's blurry. The lines are quite expressive. He's made no attempt to kind of make it look smooth and realistic. He's like, I'm putting this paint here and you're going to deal with it. So this is actually a later version of the sick child, because I couldn't find the one from 1885 on the old internet, but it would have been quite similar to this. And he painted this when he was 22. And when it was exhibited in Oslo, it kind of horrified the public, not because of the subject matter, because especially in the Victorian and Edwardian times, the topic of kind of young children, young innocents kind of passing away before their time, and was actually quite common, which is quite strange, but this was a kind of something that people quite often painted. But it would have been the way that this would have been painted that would have been quite shocking, because although kind of you had the Impressionists and things, this is something that's a bit more dark, so people weren't quite used to it yet. Yeah. So this sick child is a title given to 6 paintings, a number of lithographs and dry point etchings, so that's prints, completed between 1885 and 1927. So this is one of these motifs that he returned to over time. He kept doing it. So he's kind of taken some of the subject from his inspiration from Crow, the intimate scenes of everyday people's lives, but he's now starting to paint it in his own way. We've got bright, vivid colour, we've got expressive brushstrokes. Yeah, and this is thought to be based on the death of his sister Sophie when she was 14. So it's kind of like he's almost kind of processing that, and now he's a bit older through his painting. So this is another work. This is Women on the Beach, Inger on the Beach actually, so it's his sister. So let's have a wee look at what's kind of your first impressions of this painting. So we've got some of the lighter colour from those kind of early Crow works. We've not got the contrasting colours of the sick child. I think it feels quite melancholy, kind of feels like it's like late at night, she's like alone on the beach by herself. She looks quite like she's away. She doesn't look like she's quite here with us. She's maybe away thinking about something. She's not kind of present in the moment. I think the rocks on this are lovely. I think they're painted really, really nicely. So let's have a wee look about how this was received at the time. So this is called Inger on the Beach from 1889, and the contemporary reviews were that it was pure gibberish and the public was being bamboozled. So they felt that this was a rubbish painting and it shouldn't be up in a museum. Strong opinion there. Tell us how you really feel. It was also described as a physical entity with no trace of life and expression, as untrue in the form as in the colour. On the whole, it seems to us to have such a low artistic value that his presence at the exhibition is itself difficult to defend. Again, sick burn. So I would disagree with that. I think it's quite well painted. I really like the colour. So this would now be described as a kind of a character landscape, in that we've got this woman sitting on the beach and her environment around her is reflecting how she is feeling. So she's kind of sitting there, she's feeling quite sad, quite pale, she's not really here, she's quite away, and then the colours around her kind of continue to exude this kind of melancholy dreaminess. You've kind of got these pale blues, you've kind of got the deep blues of the rocks. So it's meant to, the way she is feeling is reflected in how the landscape around her is painted. But at the time they just didn't think it was very good. All right, but he was still quite young at this point as well. All right, so even though he got those awful reviews, he won a scholarship to Paris in 1889 to study. And he wasn't very impressed with the teaching he got there. He thought it was quite boring. He thought it was very staid because they were doing lots of like working in the studio and drawing the model in a very classical way. So he kind of looked around at the other things that were happening in Paris at the time to get his inspiration. So he had a little go at experimenting with pointillism and impressionism, which is kind of the example of this work here. So he's kind of used little dots and dashes to create an impression of the scene in front of him. But it takes quite a long time and he didn't have the patience to stick with it. He thought it was quite laborious and not that effective. So he was a bit like, meh, sack that, gave it a go, not doing it again. But he was enthralled by the vast display of modern European art that he saw there. So he was a bit like, I've got this teacher who's teaching me stuff, but actually I go out there and I see some work of some great artists, such as Paul Gauguin. So this is a Gauguin here, when this was very inspirational for Munch. He also saw the work of Vincent van Gogh and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. And these are all artists who are very notable for how they use colour to convey emotion, which, you know, bear that in mind because it might come up soon. So he was particularly inspired by Gauguin's reaction against realism. So kind of Gauguin was no longer trying to paint things realistically, he was painting them how he wanted to paint them. For example, look at this image, we've got a pink beach, we've got an orange water, we've got a very blue sky. It's not like a photo, you know, he's not trying to show reality in any way. And he really liked Gauguin's idea that art was human work and not an imitation of nature. So he really wanted to kind of be able to kind of show something that you wouldn't be able to see with your eyes in nature, if that makes sense. Ooh, what's happening here? So, unfortunately for Munch, in December of that year, his father died. And hence why I put this sad picture here. And not only was this very tragic to lose his father when he was still quite a young man, but he was now responsible for his family financially, which is a really big thing to be responsible for. He's got lots of siblings. He's got one who's quite unwell, and he's got kind of an unmarried sister who wouldn't be able to make their own money. So that's people he's got to support. And he's just decided to be an artist, so not known for the ludicrous cash. So it might be quite stressful. So he had to return to Norway briefly to take out loans to kind of keep everyone afloat. And then obviously he's lost his father. He's got this newfound responsibility that might impact his future ideas of being an artist. And he became deeply depressed, and he also began drinking very heavily, so much so that he was unable to paint for months. He was also plagued by suicidal thoughts, which is obviously very sad. He said, "I live with the dead, my mother, my sister, my grandfather, my father. Kill yourself and then it's over. Why live?" Which is very, very serious words for such a young man. From 1891, he based himself in Berlin, and this is when we start to see the classic Munch works appear. He began to use contrasting colours and put more focus on the figure. So you can see here, the focus is the figure, and the backgrounds around him become more soft and amorphous, which is a great word, amorphous, without shape, kind of flowing, and his figures appear to float in space. So this is Melancholy from 1891. So his father's just died, deep melancholy. And what I really like about this, as an example of that kind of character landscape, is that you've got this guy here, and he's clearly sitting on a beach, but the focus is on him, and the beach almost feels like an extension of his mood. It's quite dark, you've got the colours, you've got kind of these really gestural marks that are kind of create a sense of confusion. It really feels like the beach is just an extension of him and how he's feeling. And I think it's a really good example of that. You do get a real sense of melancholy from this. So let's have a look at kind of the classic Munch work. Oh, sorry, I've missed a quote. He said, "I started as an impressionist, but during the violent mental and vital convulsions of the Bohème period, Impressionism gave me insufficient expression. I had to find an expression for what stirred in my mind." So if we're thinking Bohème, we're thinking kind of Paris, Van Gogh's around, you've got the Moulin Rouge, everyone's drinking absinthe, there's the can-can, all sorts of scandalous things are happening. And so Munch was part of this kind of already turbulent time, but he also had a lot of this personal grief as well. So it was a real kind of mixing of the two things that meant for an extremely heightened emotional time for him. Then that's how he created these very emotional paintings. So we're going to learn a wee bit about what kind of some of these terms mean. So expressionism is a style where the artist seeks to show the emotions, moods, and responses that kind of the subject of the painting arouse within the person rather than just the reality as we see it. So that last picture we looked at, he could have just drawn a man looking sad on a beach, but he chose to make the beach itself look sad. It all looks very melancholy, it all looks very drab. So you kind of got that overwhelming sense of sadness coming from it, rather than just kind of what you get in a photograph of a man looking sad on the beach. So an example of expressionism is painting a portrait in a way that shows you how you feel about the person rather than painting like a photograph. If that makes sense. So like if you painted somebody you really didn't like, you might paint it in a way that you could really tell you didn't like them. You might use like quite jaggy strokes or lots of dark colours or or maybe lots of red. Or if you're painting somebody that you really loved, you might paint them looking really beautiful, really radiant, full of light. So here you can kind of get a sense of how you as the artist would feel about the person you're painting. And then symbolism is, rather than painting the world as it is, the artist uses different symbols. Another word for symbol is kind of a device or a motif, which is kind of a recurring image or a way of painting that shows something, e.g. Using different colours to symbolise different things. So they use different symbols to create an underlying meaning or idea. For example, like we talked about last week, trees representing life, growth, rebirth. Or another example is kind of when artists maybe paint like a tree with apples and a snake on it, we think of the Bible and we think of kind of the temptation of man. So that's the Bible story. So if you hear someone described as a symbolist, to put them in kind of context of a wider symbolist movement, is that if amongst all the symbolists you couldn't line them up and all their paintings look the same, they'd have no consistent style, they'd all paint in very different ways, but they all had the same kind of idea that the artist was like a visionary, and that the artist was able to express the world beyond superficial appearances. So kind of artists had this kind of like their own ideas and they were able to express them in this new way. So it kind of almost like the artist knew things that you didn't. It's kind of a bit uppity, but they created some nice work. So that's kind of two movements that Munch is associated with. So if you hear me say expressionist or symbolist, these are the kind of ideas that I'm talking about. So now we're getting on to The Frieze of Life, a series of paintings from the 1890s. During his 4 years in Berlin, Munch sketched out most of the ideas that would comprise his major work, The Frieze of Life, which was first designed as a book illustration, but was then later expressed in paintings. So it was originally going to be a book, and then it kind of expanded and got bigger and bigger and bigger and became loads of paintings. Munch did his own version of Impressionism, but instead of capturing the essence of light and atmosphere, he captured the impressions of the life of the soul. So kind of some of the topics we see covered here are love, angst, death, and melancholy. All good stuff, you know. He also said, I don't paint what I see, but what I saw. So he's kind of drawing on his own life experiences to kind of create these paintings that kind of are kind of universal. They're human emotions that are universal, and he's kind of drawing from his own life to be able to create these images that we can all kind of identify with in some way or another. So the first and most famous, as we've already talked about, was Scream, which he worked on from 1893. I did kind of the last version around 1910. And over his life, he did 50 versions of the Scream. And it was based on a real event on his life. And here's a wee extract from his diary on the day. He said, I was walking along a path with two friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly, the sky turned blood red, as we can see here. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue-black fjord and the city. My friends walked on, but I stood there, trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature. So, it could be thought, that this is a self-portrait actually, and this is Munch himself, or this could be the representation of that scream that is passing through nature. So so let's have a look at some of the different examples. So here's a lithograph version. There we go. So you can see here's the city, here's some boats, here's his two pals. I presume this is the fjord. Not entirely sure what a fjord looks like. Here's another one. So this was actually done the paint on cardboard. So, you know, never feel that you've got to work on the best of canvases. Some artist worked on cardboard. And then here's another one. Here we go. So this is the one where kind of you've got a guy here and then they're leaning on the fence. So this could be Munch and then this could be the Scream. So there's kind of various different interpretations of, is this meant to be Munch himself or is it something else? And then here's the last one. This one feels really desperate. I really like this one. This one is oil pastel on cardboard. And I think this one's actually my favorite. I love this yellow lake. And I just feel like you can feel all the whoosh, almost like the wind, kind of the wind of the Scream. In the way that all his brush strokes are going this way. You can see it going this way and this way, and it feels like almost getting sucked into a tunnel, like a wind tunnel. But that's just me. So Scream is one of the most famous paintings in the world, but it wasn't always. It kind of became famous a bit like the Mona Lisa after it was stolen, and then people got really into it. So in 1994, the same day as the opening of the Winter Olympics in Lillehammer, two men broke into the National Gallery in Oslo and stole its version of the Scream, leaving a note reading, "Thanks for the poor security." It was later found and returned in a car, so it doesn't seem like they were the best art thieves. And it was then tried to be stolen another 2 times, I think, to date. And obviously that helps add to kind of the mystery and the intrigue. And today it's the 4th highest nominal price. I'm not really sure what that nominal price means, but it's a lot of money was paid for a version of the Scream at auction, which is, don't know if I can even read that, $119,922,500. Lots of money. Don't know how much. Loads. Then, all right, what do you think? So quite similar to the Scream. Have a look at this painting. Now we know that Munch is trying to evoke emotions. So what emotion do you feel he might be trying to evoke here? So we've got, again, the red sky. We've got all these people with quite green faces, quite green. They maybe look a bit ill. You can't really see their expressions, a bit like the Scream. They're kind of smoothed out, obscured. You can just kind of see the hollows of their eyes. I think the word that comes to mind is drawn. They look very drawn. And you've got this similar in this very dark landscape with this blood red sky above. So I would actually think it was numbness. If it was me, I thought it would be like numbness and deep grief, but it's actually anxiety from 1984. And this is kind of a combination of actually 2 paintings he'd done in the past. As you can see, the background looks quite a lot like the Scream, but the figures and the kind of the procession of people in black is actually taken from a painting that he did of his mother's funeral. So kind of a combining of the 2 things there. You've got the kind of the Scream and the kind of the grief procession. I don't necessarily get anxiety from this, but I think, yeah, kind of that grief, that kind of doggedness. I think drawn is the overwhelming word for me. But definitely feel free to disagree with me because I'm not always right. So kind of just have a think about what this painting kind of brings up for you, really. What does it make you think of? Then we've got this one. So what have we got here? So we've got kind of a man and a woman looking deeply into each other's eyes in front of a tree. They're kind of almost joined, at least like her hair is like kind of crawling up his chest, which is quite scary. They're kind of in shadow. And although kind of the world out here looks quite normal, we've got a tree and a little house and the sky is blue. Down here looks quite dark, it looks very strange. And he's got some kind of roses behind his back. And he looks very pale, he doesn't look very well. And she seems to have blue rolling down her cheeks. Is she crying? Oh, so what do we think this one might be about? So this one is called Eye to Eye and it's from 1899. So I think it's kind of about like courtship, maybe kind of like unrequited love. And you kind of got like, looks like they're meeting in secret because they're not in the house, they're like away from the house behind a tree and they're like staring deeply into each other's eyes. And he's got these roses, but he hasn't given them to her. He's kind of holding them behind his back. So maybe he's like concealing his ardent love. Like the roses could be a symbol of that love and the fact that he's kind of hiding them away. And then she doesn't look very happy. So I think maybe she's leaving him, but she doesn't really want to. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? This is my favorite. what do we think is happening here? So we've got a similar, it looks like the same couple, doesn't it? So we've got this kind of like this fierce red hair that again is kind of clambering all over this guy. You've got the similarly quite the pale man, same haircut, same clothes. He's kind of doubled over. She's kind of like holding him. Sorry, I've just spilled coffee everywhere. Again, they're kind of in this kind of like shadow. They're surrounded by this darkness. So this one is called Love and Pain. Woo, great. And in some other versions, it's been called The Vampire, which you can kind of see she's kind of bent over his neck and the kind of the red kind of thing, blood. And he painted this about 12 times over his life, a few different iterations. So kind of red symbolized could often mean kind of like love or passion or danger. So it's almost like they're kind of lovers, but like she is dangerous. And the red is kind of all consuming him, her hair is kind of covering him. And then definitely with this kind of them being in this shadow, it doesn't imply that like this is a good situation. So maybe that's the pain, you know? Here's another version. This one is more often referred to as vampire. Munch never called them vampire himself, but other people did, which you can see why. It definitely looks like she's biting him. And it kind of, you kind of get a sense in this that like the woman is dangerous. And from like the last painting as well, eye to eye, the woman, she doesn't look, she's not kind of how people normally paint women, which also I'm not saying is good, where they're like beautiful objects of desire. Here she's perhaps an object of desire, but she looks dangerous. Her hair is unkempt. She looks quite wild. She looks kind of like a force of nature that's kind of subsuming this man. So definitely I kind of, maybe there's a sense of Munch being kind of a victim here. He kind of feels like he's being kind of like taken over by this woman. So maybe that's where the love and pain comes from, because he's obsessed with her, but he can't get anything, you know. And then here's another version from later in his life when he cheered up a bit. And again, you've got a similar pose, but now they're not in that shadow. They're now in a lovely forest with kind of bright colours and the sun glinting about. So, you know, this one was done a lot later, so maybe he's kind of really turned a corner in his life here. But looks very different. Her hair also here looks a lot less threatening. It's not like strangling him, it's just there. Very interesting. I think definitely from looking at these paintings, you get the sense that he was an interesting man and would have been quite strange to interact with. This one, again, kind of might be starting to notice a trend here. So this is Ashes from 1894, and I'll show you another version he did in 1925 a bit later. So what do you think might be happening here? So again, we've got this guy in black. He's very pale. He's kind of cowering in the corner next to a tree. He's holding his head. He's not looking very happy. Again, you've got this woman here. She's got this fiery red hair. She's also got like a red undergarment on, which is kind of exposed, which, you know, it's 1894. Ladies don't do that. So kind of that red again could be like passion, desire, danger, love. Like there's many different things we can associate with that red. And what I think is really interesting here is, again, her hair is like kind of attaching to its back. It's almost like her hair is like pulling him back in. And then obviously beautiful long flowing hair is quite an archetype of like female beauty. So it's almost like her beauty, her femininity is like reeling him back in, which is quite a kind of a misogynistic idea, but it is 1894. So we kind of get there's a real sense of kind of like this temptress, or maybe she has been a temptress, but now she's not looking very happy. Her dress is kind of undone and she's looking quite upset. She's got her hands on her head, she's kind of looking up at the sky. Something has happened between these two in the dark woods. So that I get a sense they're in a dark place, maybe both literally and in their relationship. He's kind of in the dark, but she's kind of glowing. She's the kind of the center of attention of this picture. And he looks really upset. She looks mildly upset. She doesn't look as decimated as he does. His head's almost melting into his hand. Not having a good time. Oh, where's my text? There we go. So this work shows a critical scene between a couple in the forest. The man is hunched over in shame or dejection, and the dishevelled woman is wide-eyed and motionless in frustration or despair. The picture's title suggests that for whatever reason, the heat of their passion has burned out at that moment. It is probably not insignificant, I like this, I took this from Wikipedia, it's not insignificant that the scene was painted at the time when Munch himself was having a clandestine, read secret affair with Millie Tholo, the wife of his cousin, not Chill Munch, during which two they would meet in the woods. So again, maybe Munch here is drawing on his own experience of having an illicit affair with his cousin's wife in the woods, and maybe it didn't go very well. Also, after the fact, on a lithograph of this particular work, he wrote, "I felt our love lying on the earth like a heap of ashes." So it seems like this particular love affair didn't end well, as it often doesn't when you have relationships with people who are married to somebody you're related to. Not a great idea. Here's a later scene that he painted again in 1925. So we look a lot more intense color here, fiery. It's almost like they're looking into a forest. Well, he's not looking into a forest fire. She's looking into a forest fire, and you're kind of getting the light of the blaze on her. So it's kind of almost like maybe their love for each other is like burned up, and it's causing danger for them, you know, as it would if you're having an affair with your cousin's wife. That's not a great thing to do for the personal relationships in your life. It could kind of blow up in your face. Again, she's not looking up at the sky anymore. She's looking down at him. She's looking really upset. Again, her hair is like kind of latching onto his back. This time he's green. He looks really green. So they're kind of in a dark place, but the energy is more bright, more burning. The colors are more vivid. Yeah, I quite like both versions of these work, and I think the fact that he had an affair with his cousin's wife just kind of adds for some reason I find that quite funny. I don't know why. All right, here's another lithograph. Again, we've got this kind of sad-looking man that in the past paintings has been Munch himself. So maybe again we're looking at Munch here. So there's quite a few different versions of this. Here's one with color. So this time you've got this blonde woman, and again her hair is kind of like latching onto them. She's turning away. She almost looks ghost-like. She's insubstantial. He's very solid, very dark, and it's, again, her hair is kind of like leaning back and kind of leaning down towards his heart. So it's kind of almost like that, again, that sense of like she's kind of, her feminine wiles have gotten at his heart and he can't let her go. Here's another version. I find these so dramatic, they're almost funny. That's just me though. So we've got this kind of ghostly woman walking away. She's dropping a flower. You know, maybe he's given her a flower and now she's dropping it. It looks like she's walking out into the sea. Again, I think she looks quite ghostly. It's almost like she's not really there and he's maybe just imagining her. And her hair's blowing back and kind of attaching to this man. Again, he's holding his heart and her hair is on his heart. So the symbolism is quite bold here. We're not got subtlety. We're not going for that. She's in his heart. He's kind of leaning onto this tree. He's got kind of hollowed out eyes. He's looking really sad. And again, he's got these kind of roses growing beside him. This painting is called The Separation. So again, we're getting this sense of kind of like, he really loves her and she's not there anymore, she's going. It looks like she's almost gone to me. She looks like a kind of a spirit. She's no longer physically there, she's just gone. I would presume this is about a romantic relationship. I don't think this is about his wife, her mother, his sister. There's definitely kind of a romanticism here. And it's not gone well and now he's really sad. Here's a color version as well. Again, you've kind of got this woman, she's in white. Maybe it's almost like kind of a wedding scene, and this time he's holding his hand to his heart and it's red, it's painted in red. It's kind of that love, that pain, that kind of that life force, that blood. And again, her hair is kind of coming back and combining with his hair. Yeah, it's kind of a real sense of kind of they've had a romantic entanglement and they're slowly becoming untangled. And it looks like it's burning him. It looks really sore. So yeah, you can see, you can get a lot of emotion from these paintings. All right, here's another one. What do we think's happening here? We've got this guy looking raging. He's kind of walking away, he's holding his head in his hands, but he's kind of looking back over his shoulder. And what's he looking back over his shoulder at? there's a couple of figures on this pier. Looks like a man and a woman on the pier, and maybe they're going for a boat ride. I get a sense of jealousy and sadness. Don't know about you guys. I think he wishes he was on the pier. So this is another version of Melancholy from 1893, and the inspiration from this painting was an unhappy romantic affair that Munch's friend Japan Nielsen was involved with. And free love was kind of big in the time of the Bohemian 1890s, and this quite often led to quite dramatic love triangles with lots of people falling out because they were all in love with the same person. I think we do get a real sense of kind of melancholy. This guy feels really rejected. He really wishes he was over there with the lady. He's really sad. I get a real sense of jealousy from this picture, just the way he's kind of looking over his shoulder. But then here's another version, which I think this one's got a bit more melancholy about it. I think in the last one he had a bit more anger and a bit more jealousy. It was a bit more active. Whereas in this one, I feels much more passive, doesn't he? He's just sitting, looking dejected. He's not even looking at them anymore. He's just fully in his own world. He is literally blue. This man is literally blue with sadness. He is very, very melancholy. Yeah, and I think it's really good, really nice composition here, because the way the line of the shoreline goes really directs your eye to this couple here. You maybe wouldn't notice otherwise. You maybe focus on this dude and the house, whereas the way he's drawn the shoreline really brings your eye to there. Here's another version as well. Again, so you can see a similar thing with the shoreline, this little couple getting smaller and smaller, and there's more focus on the guy in the foreground now. He's looking pretty sad. Sad dude. This one's a bit more self-explanatory here. We've got a kind of a later stage of life. This is the deathbed. Again, possibly based on his own family here. Again, you've got these kind of not very many features on these people's faces. So you're not really seeing kind of meticulous drawings of people that are sad, but just from the way he's painted it, you know that everyone is very sad. They're either very pale or they're very red. This woman, her eyes are really sunken. They've got touches of green in them. They're surrounded by this kind of big dark shadow of pain. They're all kind of not looking at each other. They're in this kind of redness. It's a real, yeah, you can just tell it's a sad painting from the color, from the darkness. Yeah, really very, very simple, but very effective. But we're not going to dwell on this today. All right. So here's a self-portrait with skeleton arm, which he did in 1895. So Munch's done this series called The Frieze of Life, and although the frieze itself is very sad, it sold incredibly well, and his exhibitions toured Europe. Obviously, because it was quite dramatic, it attracted a lot of press. There was a lot of criticism of it, which actually was just really good to get it more well-known, and more people wanted to come and see it, and some of those people really liked it. He spent these years working between Norway, Paris, and Berlin. He became a lot more well-known and made loads of cash. He became very successful, lots and lots of money. Money was never really a worry for him again. Very, very successful man. This is what he looked like at this point. Cool moustache. Very nice. So, we may have gotten, from looking over those images, that Munch's love life wasn't straightforward, and he seemed to have trouble with women and romantic relationships. And these themes are central to some of his greatest works, I think. He seems a bit of quite an emo dude, particularly when it comes to women. In life, apparently he was very apprehensive about women, and this comes from kind of contemporary sources, if not possibly terrified of them. He believed that women deprived men of their creative energy, sucked life out of them, just like vampires. So some of those kind of, that imagery from those paintings starts to kind of make a bit of sense, doesn't it? And he said there was nothing more disastrous for a man than a touching love affair, which doesn't speak of somebody who's had maybe kind of the most wholesome or kind of fruitful relationships. Perhaps some of his early relationships went quite badly and were quite painful, which, you know, we could surmise from those quite pained paintings, which is a real shame, because it seems to have kind of affected his opinions on women and affected his ability to have kind of meaningful and lasting romantic relationships. So that's a real sad thing. He had very few serious romantic relationships over his life, but the most noteworthy would be Tulla Larsen. Here's Tulla Larsen. daughter of a wealthy wine merchant. And what did Munch say about Tula Larsen? He said, "The touch of her narrow, clammy lips was like the kiss of a corpse." That's not a great review. It's also a really horrible thing to say about a woman you're in a relationship with. Yeah, there's not I think that really speaks for itself. It's not very nice. It doesn't speak of somebody that's kind of really invested in the relationship. It's really mean. So their relationship, which we've put in inverted commas, given he put this quote in there, lasted 4 years and they were briefly engaged. From Munch's account, and it is really important to say that this is from Munch's account, who seems to have a lot of baggage when it comes to this. It seems that Tula set her cap at him and went as far as following him around Europe as he moved to try and evade her, which, you know, it could be true, but we've got to remember that this is coming from him, so we're not entirely sure. He did not even try to hide his take on the matter from her, and never even pretended to be caring, even at the height of the love affair. He said, "You will continually seek an earthly happiness with me, who, as I always explain to you, does not belong to this earth." So it sounds like he doesn't sound like he's in the best place personally. He doesn't think he belongs on the earth. He sounds very depressed to me. It doesn't sound like somebody who's having a great time would say. So obviously, if you're feeling that unwell, it's very hard to have an intimate relationship at that point, especially if you've got very little support. Maybe you don't want it. Anyway, so they're not on the best of starts. Historians suspect that he deliberately treated her neglectfully, rudely, and even aggressively to alienate her and demonstrate that no good could ever come from him. Yeah, so it seems like he maybe tried to break it off and she wouldn't take no as an answer, which isn't good. It's not good. Not good at all. So she appeared in quite a few of his paintings. This is one called The Dance of Life. And it spans from kind of this figure kind of represents youth to kind of this woman here whose redness, she kind of represents married life. And then here we've got a widow. And all three of these people kind of really, they look quite like Tula. And they were having a relationship at this point. So it's not out of the realms that it is her. And it's quite strange. All the kind of the women in the background look quite similar. This image also looks quite like Munch. So it's kind of this kind of he's kind of showing the life cycle of a woman, which again is quite reductive. Yeah, this figure here as well doesn't seem to be treating this woman very nicely. Yes, it's quite I'm not really sure what it means, but it's an interesting painting in the context of their relationship. This is also a self-portrait he did with her in 1905. It used to be in whole, but he sawed it in half after a particularly dramatic argument where shots were fired and Munch lost a bit of his finger on his left hand. He then wore gloves whenever in public or in a painting for the rest of his life, and he really was very sensitive to people staring at his finger. And this isn't a very nice picture of Tula. He showed her looking very haggard, very tired, very downcast. It's also not a very nice picture of him. He's looking quite red, quite angry. He's looking at her not in the most affectionate way. You've got this very contrasting colour. You've got this red and this green. Green in itself, it doesn't look like a happy, fresh green. It looks like quite a sad, jealous, sickening green. You've also got this kind of this other figure in the background, which again looks quite like Munch when he paints himself in paintings. Could also be maybe somebody who's jealous of the relationship, who really knows. And eventually Tula married another artist and seemed pretty happy. So they broke up and she moved on. And the other artist painted her like this, which is a nicer representation than this. I think if you're the person you love is going to paint you, you'd rather be painted like this. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the major relationships of his life, and kind of gives you a bit of an insight into kind of this, how kind of he wasn't a happy man for a lot of the times when he was painting his most successful works. As his fame and wealth grew, his emotional state remained insecure. He was drinking a lot, because although he was getting all this validation, he still didn't feel right within himself. He didn't have much confidence. He was very paranoid. He didn't get on very well with people, was quite argumentative. He wasn't in a good place within himself. As you may be able to tell from this painting entitled Self-Portrait in Hell from 1905. I think if you're getting to the point where you're painting that, it's quite the title itself, you feel like you're in hell, is quite a big indicator, isn't it? So here you've got him kind of standing there, he's in the nude, he's got his face is very red, his body looks quite pale, it's yellow, it's not very healthy, and he's kind of in this like swirling darkness and redness. So it does very much look like if he's maybe in a cave with lots of fire. It doesn't look like a nice place to be. I quite like it as a painting, weirdly. But yeah, not happy. You've also got this portrait here. He did self-portrait with a bottle of wine from 1906, kind of again choosing to have kind of alcohol in the image with him. It's not great. He's kind of looking sad and alone in a cafe. Nobody's with him. He's very isolated. He's looking down. He's looking dejected. His figure is slumped. He's not having a good time. And then also there's this painting here called Self-Portrait with Cigarette from 1895. And this is a really interesting painting for symbolism. I've put a little video down below, which kind of explains it in a bit more depth. That down below, he's painted himself kind of up lit in this very dark room. He's looking quite shocked. He's kind of looking at you and he's a bit like, whoa, what was that? He's kind of surrounded by these swirling darkness of the cigarette. And cigarettes at this time would convey quite a lot, because kind of men, particularly of Munch's social class, would smoke cigars. Cigarettes were a fairly new thing, and they were very much associated with the working class, because they were kind of, you could make them yourself, you could roll your own. And as artists do, artists living the countercultural life quite often adopt symbols of the working class. So kind of smoking cigarettes became this kind of very like alternative lifestyle, bohemian thing to do. So he's kind of aligning himself with this kind of new way of thinking, kind of the bohemian life, rejecting kind of like stuffy aristocracy, kind of trying to engage more with kind of quote unquote real people. It was kind of a patronizing ideology, but kind of represented a real social shift. And a lot of kind of aristocrats and the upper middle classes were very worried about this bohemian trend. It was kind of the big moral scare of the time, and cigarettes were thought to kind of cigarettes and absinthe as well were kind of associated with like moral degeneracy and becoming kind of very unwell. So it was thought even at one point that cigarettes, as opposed to cigars, could give you kind of depression and make you see things, much like absinthe with the kind of the green fairy is kind of associated with kind of becoming unwell morally and within the body. So he's kind of aligning himself with that. Munch would have known all the baggage associated with the image of the cigarette, and he's kind of aligning himself with this kind of this way of life. But again, check out that video, it'll explain it much better than me. So in 1908, he had a breakdown. His lifestyle caught up with him, his demons caught up with him, and he fainted in the street. He was consuming copious amounts of alcohol, perhaps to cope with a lot of the trauma he's had and a kind of a lot of his ongoing issues that he really needed to deal with. And he entered a private sanatorium because he was experiencing hallucinations and was partially paralysed down his left side. So he was in a really bad state. After 6 months of reducing his alcohol intake, he was feeling better and ready to paint again. At this point, his life calmed down significantly. So this is an image of him that he took in the sanatorium. It's kind of like a private hospital. And then this is a portrait he did at the end. His work from 1908 onwards isn't as urgent, emotional, or dark. He's kind of not ostracized. He's exorcised those demons, if you will. He's kind of dealt with a lot of those feelings within the phase of life. And so here you've got this painting, and again, it's got that kind of like symbolist painting style. It's very rough, but the colours are much brighter. You've got yellows, you've got pinks, you've got blues, you've got turquoises. It's a much more joyous image. And he looks a bit healthier, even though he's yellow, he looks a bit healthier. So, as an example of kind of one of these happier paintings, this is the Sun from 1911 from the University of Oslo, and it is more than 7 meters wide, and it's part of a series of murals that he was commissioned to do by the University of Oslo. So he's kind of at that status where people are commissioning him to come and do these big murals on public buildings. So despite his kind of his troubled times, he's still doing really well within his career. And this is a very different painting. You wouldn't look at this and be like, oh, that's Edvard Munch, because it's light, it's joyous, there's bright colours, it's not kind of swirling in the same way. The lines are bright, they're bold. It's very, very different. It's quite nice though. You kind of got this pearl rising out of the sea as well. The sun rising. It's almost like a new start for him. So this is another painting he did from 1914, which is Workers Returning Home. It kind of looks a bit more dark, but he's kind of getting back to his kind of just depicting kind of regular scenes rather than these really heavy emotions. So you've kind of got these guys, and from the perspective, it almost looks like they're going to walk out on top of you. They're kind of all pouring out of wherever they've been to work. And you've kind of got all these different figures in here. They're not looking overly happy. They look quite tired. Again, you've got these kind of sunken eyes, but I think it's quite a nice painting. This other one is Landscape by the Sea from 1918. So again, although these are nice paintings, they definitely don't have the emotional charge that his Frieze of Life series has. He's still painting in a similar way. He's using similar techniques, but there's just not as much connection there. And that's why I put a lot of these in, to kind of put the contrast in. Here is another 2 self-portraits. He kind of kept doing self-portraits throughout his life. And this is a kind of a before and after shot. I was wondering if you can have a guess what you think it might be before and after. So it's actually before and after. This one on the left is self-portrait with Spanish flu, and this one is self-portrait after Spanish flu. So the Spanish flu was obviously an awful pandemic that killed loads and loads of people, kind of in 1918 really. And Munch had it when he was quite old. Obviously, hadn't been looking after his body very well, but he did survive. So you've got, this is him painting with it, and this is him painting after it. Which is quite an interesting way to document it, really. Particularly relevant this year as well. This is Starry Night from 1922. This is one of his most famous paintings that isn't in the Frieze of Life. And again, it's kind of reminiscent of that Van Gogh Starry, Starry Night that perhaps Munch would have seen. And again, he's kind of depicting the frozen isolation of kind of the Nordic landscape. But it looks quite beautiful. It's kind of icy and cold, and it doesn't seem like there's anyone else around. There's just shadows of people. Looks like there's a shadow of a family here with a man walking away. So we've still got kind of little bits of symbolism in there, but they're perhaps not as overt or as urgent as in the Frieze of Life. They're not as easy to interpret, because perhaps this is more personal for Munch, rather than him trying to depict a universal themes such as like angst, death, love and pain, you know? But still a very nice picture. Again, winter night. So he's really kind of drawing on these kind of very isolated, icy scenes out in Norway. Much more calm colours as well. He's using a lot more complementary colours now. Then I've put these in because I think these are quite interesting. So in 1930, when Munch was 66 years old, he had an intraocular in his eye, hemorrhage in his right eye, which affected his sight. For several months, with methodical precision, he attempted to show these on paper, to show what it was like as his eye condition changed, which is quite interesting. So he's kind of painting what he would normally be painting, but he's also painting in this kind of distortion that this illness is causing. It's a pretty cool thing to do. Inside his eye, the blood had coagulated in shapes and spots and smudges, which were superimposed on his normal vision. So he was they were getting in the way of what he was seeing. And to him, some of them look like birds, others like concentric circles. So here's the first one. So he's kind of drawing this model in his studio, but he's also painting in the way that it's affecting his vision. You can see here, there's a kind of a bird shape there. Just I think it's just quite a cool exercise, really. Here's another one, kind of more of it in here. Again, kind of becoming like a bird. I think it's a really interesting exercise to do by quite a famous artist. Here's another one. So this is, it's clearer to see the bird in here. So again, he's drawing, this looks like a self-portrait where he's rubbing his eye. So he's covering his one eye, he's got the injury in one eye. And then he's drawing in the kind of the things that it's making him see. Really cool. And that's the last one where you can see kind of the concentric circles. So this is perhaps what it would look like when he closed his eyes. So maybe it was something that didn't go away even when he closed his eyes. I think it's just a really cool exercise to document that, because not many people do that. There we go. So this is self-portrait between the clock and the bed. And this is one of his final paintings. And this Munch depicts himself without any attempt to hide the fact that he's old, albeit not without an element of defiance in the face of death which awaits him. So he's kind of confronting his own mortality. With the stance of an old man, he places himself between two symbols of death, the clock, a grandfather clock, and the bed. Here he stands on the threshold of a sunlit room beyond him. There you go. So it's almost like he's kind of in life and he's looking to pass through to heaven, full of works of art which have been his whole life. And in the bedroom, with the shadow on the floor in front of him, has the shape of a cross. There we go. So he's again, as his life, he did all these self-portraits. So it's natural that he would do some self-portraits towards the end, contemplating the end of life and contemplating the process of aging, which is quite a common thing for artists who kind of live to that age. And we saw that with Picasso. I think this is really nice. Again, painted in a similar style, very contrasting colours, yellows and blues, reds and blacks. And yeah, I really like the kind of he's looking back on his life here in this kind of glowing room filled with kind of all his successes. I think that's quite nice. He's able to maybe look back at his life and see some positive things. Now he's a bit older. And he died in 1944. And weirdly, during his life, the Nazis denounced Munch as a degenerate. They thought his paintings were awful and they removed them all from galleries in Germany. However, they sponsored his funeral. So it's kind of like they adopted him towards the end. And maybe once he couldn't be like, I don't agree with you. Munch wasn't a Nazi. He really didn't like the Nazis. And he was really scared that they were going to come again as a degenerate artist. So a little tidbit for the end. And then also I thought these would be quite interesting to include. These are some versions of Munch's work that Andy Warhol did. So these are some Andy Warhol works. As you know, Andy Warhol liked to sample lots of artists, and he kind of did rejigged versions of their work. So here are his versions of The Scream and also this one of Madonna. It's quite interesting. Just thought I'd throw those in for interest. Thanks for watching, everyone. Next week we're going to be learning about Paul Klee. Okay, so tune in for that one. Bye.